It's the boy Blackbeard Mirage. I'm back. What's happening to everybody out there? It's time to go into some more American history. And as usual, we're going to dig deep into some stuff. So just want to welcome you back to the Mirage universe. And let's get our thinking caps on. Let's get our pen and pads out to go over some more information. Since 2001, a lot of us have been very, very privy to this whole war on terrorism that we see, and this whole war on Islam that we see in a lot of the different national and international medias. Basically, we have this real big propaganda machine out here that wants to make Islam look bad and wants to make, that whole culture and heritage look very, very bad. And the reason why is because there is an Eastern aspect of the Islamic Empire, and there is a Western aspect of the Islamic Empire. Now, a lot of us know about the different Ottoman Empire or the Osman Ali empires, or nations rather, that existed in Levant. But most of that was broken up from World War I, especially when Turkey, basically, in their whole situation after World War I, a lot of those different Osman Ali territories and those bailiffs basically had to give up all that stuff. And a lot of these European Caucasian amalgamated or bleached out Holy Roman Empire families, they started taking over more of these areas. So this is why in Turkey today, although you still see so-called Arabs, you also see a lot of the Caucasian European influence as well. And this is kind of throughout the whole Levant and Middle East. And a lot of this, came from the results of World War I and World War II. But nevertheless, you all still are familiar with the Islamic presence in the East. Even when you look at the countries like Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, etc. When you see the flags, the colors and the symbols on the flags even somewhat are similar. One thing that's going to be for certain is you're going to see red in all the flags. And you're going to see some type of Islamic symbolism in all the flags as well. But in the West, you have the same thing. And the reason why you all don't know about it is because of the, Masonic lore or the Masonic mythos with George Washington so-called chopping down the cherry tree. Now, as we talked about on the previous tape, that cherry tree was none other than the Aboriginal Islamic Moorish flag that represented the Moorish Empire here on the American soils, North, Central, and South America. So when they talk about this war on terrorism and they created that whole Bin Laden thing and basically, took down the Twin Towers and a lot of that stuff, a lot of that was just a smokescreen, of course, to let you all, give up all your rights. You know what I'm saying? A lot of your First Amendment rights, etc. And allow them to do a lot of what they did with the Patriot Act. We know about that. But it also was a cold, covert reinsurgence of the war against the Aboriginal man. Or the Moor of the West, okay, who's really Islamic and a Muslim by blood, whether he knows it or not. And he has been, relabeled as a Negro or Black or a Christian, NBC, as they say. But nevertheless, this is where he comes from. So in this tape, we're going to read a little deeper into just some more of this Aboriginal Islamic history because, the game is up. The culture and heritage that a lot of our ancestors came from and our more direct ancestors, it was an Islamic and a Hebrew culture. You know what I'm saying? And that Islamic and Hebrew culture was the inheritance or the consolidation of what we call the Egyptian culture. Okay. Now we'll read a little bit deeper into that, and as usual, we'll analyze as we go forward. Now, what I'm reading from is basically a PDF I have on Aboriginal Moors, and it just has a lot of information in it. And on some of the stuff, it gives the book and the source, okay? And I'll do my best to give it to you when I come across it. So let's go into it. The indigenous blacks in Mexico went under many names like Mestizo, Cholo, Negroes, and even Indian. The term Marines comes from mar or mare, which in Latin implies a navigator of the waters and also means black. So the Marines took the name of the peoples they were conquering, the Mars or the Moors, a signature move of the grafted peoples. So right here, I'm kind of just going into the remainder of a previous tape when we talked about the United States Marines and where it was created. It was created from these different battles they had with these Barbary pirates or these Barbary Moors that were indigenous both to America and so-called North Africa. All right. So if you want some information on this, look up the Barbary Wars between the United States and the so-called Ottoman Empire, because that's these Moors we're talking about. So when they say the Ottoman Empire, you also got to kind of think about the Olmec Empire or the Yucatan Empire. So you have to remember these empires are on the east and the west, okay? So they were fighting you on the east and the west, all right? So let's continue. And also, too, just how they took the name Marine, how the name Marine means black navigator, all right? A signature move of the grafted amalgamated people, once again, always taking our identity and then giving us their identity, all right? Let's go. Now we're going to go a little bit into the history of the Muslims or the Moors and the amalgamated or the bleached out English, okay? Because I told you all before that a lot of these Moorish Islamic families and these Holy Roman Empire families actually were intermarried. And at some point in time, the Holy Roman European families, they were all traditionally Moorish, but they had their own concubines and wenches and harems, etc. So they bleached themselves out. So by, later points in history, a lot of this stuff, when you start reading about the British Empire, these are amalgamated people, okay? So-called mulatto people. And then these mulatto people started to intermarry with more Caucasian or white people, all right? The history of the interaction of the Moors with the white English is extensive. Our purpose in bringing this information to surface here is the subject of reparations and generally the highlighting of international laws that are of extreme importance. Our ancestors had made many international treaties with the English for protection of their citizenry and trade regulations. The Moors of the eastern part of the Islamic Empire, whose capital seat was in the western portion of Africa called the Maghreb, had made 2 treaties with Queen Elizabeth I of England as early as 1578. So the first thing, let's reread this sentence. It says that the Moors of the eastern part of the Islamic Empire, whose capital was seated in the western portion of Africa or the Maghreb, had made 2 treaties with Queen Elizabeth I of England as early as 1578. So in 1578, we have a treaty between the Muslims of the Eastern Empire, the Moors of the Eastern Empire, making a deal with Queen Elizabeth I in 1578. Islam had a major impact on Great Britain from 1558 until 1685. This is documented by researcher Nabil Matar in his book Islam in Britain. So here's a source right here for a lot of people that want to know. You have the author named Nabil Matar, Nabil Matar, Matar. His book is called Islam in Britain, where you can get this information. This explains why John Hawkins would have been trading amongst our people, flying the flag of the Moors or the Muslims, the red flag of the ancient Moorish nation, the nation of Islam. Because as I told you all before, our flag is a all red flag. And this is the red flag of the ancient Moorish Empire. So it's not something we made up. This is something our ancestors made up. So you flying that Moorish flag is not you trying to claim somebody else's stuff. It's basically you just connecting back with what was already yours and what your ancestors was doing prior to a lot of the prisoner of war situations that they got themselves involved in. These original black people are our ancestors, direct ancestors at that. There were international agreements between these nations. This flag indeed represented an independent nation and a lineage that spans back to the 18th dynasty of Egypt, called often Bana Israel or Israel, the offspring of Israel, the family of Amraan, Quran, Surah 3, Amraan, and beyond. I'm going to reread this sentence. So this all red flag of the ancient Moorish nation, it said this flag indeed represented an independent nation. So not only did it represent an independent nation, so this red flag represented the nation we came from, and this red flag obviously represented the blood lineage we came from. And it says the lineage that spans back to the 18th dynasty of Egypt, often called Bana Israel or the offspring of Israel, the family of Amraan. And this can be found in the Quran, Surah 3, So the family of Amraan can be found in the Quran, Surah 3, Amraan. Let me pull my Quran out real quick. So if you want to just know where it's at in the Quran, this is mine right here. But it's Surah 3, where they talk about the family of Imran or Amraan. Okay, it's Surah 3, the family of Amraan. All right. So going deeper into this can help us probably figure out more about the Egyptian blood lineage we have as Muslims or so-called Hebrews. All right. So this is, just real quick on how I tell you all a lot of times that these Hebrews or so-called Muslims really are just the children of the so-called Egyptians. Okay, because the Egyptian would be the more greater bloodline. And then this Muslim and this Hebrew bloodline basically is stemming from that. And you also got to remember that every dynasty of Egypt, it had a different bloodline or a different, group of so-called black people. Okay. So although they all may have been melanated Aboriginal people, it still was different bloodlines and different families controlling things at certain times. So maybe this direct bloodline that was associated with us when we were controlling Egypt, and while we have this close association with Egypt, was spanning back to the 18th dynasty, called the Offspring of Israel or the family of Amraan. Okay, so maybe this also will help us figure out why you had this battle between these Hebrews or these Israelites were basically just a certain bloodline of, ancient Aboriginal people, and then them having wars or conflicts with, let's say, they other family members of the other bloodlines of the so-called Egyptian empire, which is what you get in the Old Testament. Because when you have Ramses, he may have come from another bloodline of so-called black people that wasn't really related to us. So he may have been a so-called black man, but he may not have been from our bloodline. And this may be why he wanted to wipe out, that Hebrew Israel presence that was in Egypt, because maybe our bloodline was there before his. I'm just trying to just kind of, make a little sense of it. But anyway, it says the family of Amraan is also the family of Israel. Okay. And they spell Amraan Amraan. Amraan. Repeat this, my bad. It's the family of Amraan, and it's in the Quran, Surah 3, also the family of Israel. And you spell Amraan Amraan. That's Amraan. And Amraan sounds a lot like America, doesn't it? And Americans. So when we say that we are the original Americans or the original Aborigines or the descendants of Amraan or descendants of the Moors, you see how the A, the M, and the R is staying consistent in a lot of this stuff. So that's something that, I guess that the Most High just put with our people. That AMR, that's something that we've been using a lot, and it seems to follow us. So this is why I have no problem with calling myself an American. So if somebody asks me, what do I identify myself as? I identify myself as an Autochthonous American. You can call me an Aboriginal American. You can call me an American Moor. Okay, but either way it goes, I consider myself an American. Okay, and when I say American now, these are the bloodlines that I'm talking about of the Americans. So these ancient Muslims, these ancient Egyptians, these ancient Israelites, or these ancient Hebrews, these ancient Phoenicians, like, these ancient Holy Roman Empire Moors, like these people that were on this land, this is the people that we're talking about here. But let me continue. The Moors were international in their commerce, and many of the members of this nation had settled in America. As we have noted, Abu Bakr, the elder brother of Mansa Musa, took 400 ships to America in the early 1300s. The Atlantic Ocean was not a barrier for our people. We were and are indigenous to both land masses. It was the black indigenous populations of Moors in the West that suffered a death blow from colonizing Europeans. Throughout the 16th and 17th century, while Spanish, Dutch, French, British, and Portuguese Christians were conquering indigenous populations across the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, Islamic military power pushed the Ottomans and their North African satellites, the regencies of Tripoli, Tunis, and Tripoli is Libya, and Algeria, along with the Empire of Morocco beyond the Mediterranean, and as far as the walls of Vienna and into the English channels. This is the detailed history that has not been known by most and is at the root of the rise of the Europeans in the Western Hemisphere. So the rise of the French, British, Portuguese Christians, these Spanish, Dutch Christians and Catholics, these amalgamated people, the rise of them is the fall of the Moorish Empire, or the fall of the Islamic Empire. All right. So let's continue. It says, Islam was on the rise in the East, in Europe, and as the colonizers left for quote unquote freedom of religion, the freedom that they wanted was freedom from the oppression of Christianity. They found this in the West throughout interaction with the ancient Moorish Empire in America. Their expansion into the West, the Europeans, has buried the knowledge of the ancient indigenous Moorish Empire in America. So what you have right here is these ungrateful, slavish bastards. So across the waters or across the Atlantic, clearly a lot of our ancestors and relatives were very, very harsh and brutal on them. If you want to know more about this history, look up the white slavery, because what a lot of people don't want to let you know is that these Caucasian women actually were the slaves of the old world. All right. So yes, you did have indentured servitude, but most of what you all call slavery really were just prisoner of war situations. Like when you would look at the movie 300 Rise of an Empire, and you would see that large Persian fleet, and at the bottom of those ships, like, do you think that they were really using their own people to row those fucking massive ass boats? Hell no, they weren't. Because that Persian Empire, that's the Moorish Empire that I'm talking about now. That's why that jet black Moor that found that little girl, he raised her up. I mean, those were Moors. But anyway, those Persians at the bottom of the ships, those would be prisoners of war, you know, from other countries that they just fought against. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes they may have had their own people down there, but a lot of the times doing that grueling task, like sitting at the bottom of a boat with rats and shit running around, you know what I'm saying? Water just falling on you, and yet you chained down and just rowing and getting whipped at the same time. And if you stop rowing, you get whipped. That's what our ancestors were doing to these Caucasian males. So they were really our prisoners of war at one point, and then that's why we end up becoming their prisoners of war, because it's just all war. But nevertheless, our ancestors across the Atlantic, you know, they were brutal on these people. And, you know, anybody that was really talking about Christianity, they were being killed. So a lot of the things that they also don't tell you too is that, you know, although these Moorish empires were tolerant, but at the same time, if you didn't really go with whatever their faction was, they will kill you and take you right on out. And that's how this Osman Ali or this Ottoman Empire was, or these Muslims of, you know, across the Atlantic. They were cutthroat. You know what I'm saying? If you didn't want to get down with Islam, you know, once again, now we already know that in the Iberian Peninsula, in a lot of these Moorish universities and Moorish societies and communities, that no matter if you were Christian or Muslim or Hebrew, that you could rock in the society. We do know that. But as far as these European Christians, they wanted their own version of these religions. So they wanted their own version of Islam. They wanted their own version of Hebrewism or Judaism. And they wanted their own version of Christianity. They didn't want the original Orthodox Muslim Gnostic versions of Christianity. They didn't want the original Orthodox versions of Hebrew. You know what I'm saying? They didn't want the shit we had. They wanted our shit, but with their name on it and with their face on it. So they cloaked all this and called this shit, you know, searching for freedom of religion. And that's what brought a lot of them over here, because believe it or not, it was a little more laid back over here. You know what I'm saying? I won't say everything was just peaches and cream, but, you know, as far as that slavery and that stuff, it wasn't popping like that over here. We weren't really into that. And in this empire over here, it was a little more natural and a little more laid back. That's why when you look up the Aboriginal Moors, it's hard for y'all to find them on the American soil, because they were dressing with just, you know what I'm saying, a tobacco skirt, you know, a crown and with a feather with a crown in it, you know what I'm saying, and or a crown with a feather in it, excuse me, or maybe a turban or something like that, walking around with no shirt on. And then you see the Muslims of the East, and you see them in the traditional, what you all call Muslim attire, and then you get the two confused, not knowing that they the same people. They just live in different environments and wearing different type of stuff. But nevertheless, they both do wear the same things. So this is what happened. And then, you know, we were being really just too nice over here. You know what I'm saying? And allow some of these motherfuckers to come over here. And then also, too, don't get me wrong, like it was some, you know, Moors of across the Atlantic that sent some of them over here. You know, so it was a mixture of all that. You know what I'm saying? It was a mixture of all that. Let's continue. Of course, history proves that some of our people were brought over as slaves. However, most of them were not. We have also considered as a people that most of the prisoners of war, or quote unquote slaves, were taken from geographical areas of the Moorish Empire and the action of enslaving Moors/Muslims by the white Americans and British was and is a violation of international laws and treaty. Let me repeat that shit right there. We have also never considered as a people that most of the prisoners of war or slaves in America were taken from geographical regions or areas of the Moorish Empire, and the action of enslaving Moors or Muslims by the white Americans and British was and is a violation of international laws and treaties. Because just a little while ago, didn't I tell you all that these old Muslims in the late 1500s and throughout the 1500s made deals and treaties, you know what I'm saying, international treaties with Queen Elizabeth I of Britain? And once again now in the 1500s, this Queen Elizabeth I in Britain we talking about, this could be probably just a real light-skinned so-called black woman. So we still may not be fully talking about a Caucasian person. But yet and still, it may have been a lot of Caucasians in her family because of the amalgamation process. So this is why you having, you know, some of these old European families doing deals with these Islamic Moors, because they really at the root are both Muslims. They both Moors. They both Aboriginal copper-colored people. Because like I just told you, in the north, in Europa, you had those Moors up there that had the Holy Roman Empire. And then in the south, you had, you know what I'm saying, the Muslims that had the Osman Ali or the Ottoman Empire. But nevertheless, these are still both so-called black people. So when these white Americans that were in, you know, or not white Americans, but when these Caucasian vassals in this serf class, or these so-called white people, when they were brought over here on America and when they were let go from these plantations that they were working on as servants of the British Empire now, you got to remember, like when they went and started capturing Aboriginal people here, mislabeling them Negro, making them prisoners of war and forcing them to work on these plantations and what you all know of as slavery, that was illegal. Because based on these international treaties that this Muslim empire in North Africa had and in America that they had with the British, they weren't supposed to be doing this shit. So this whole phenomenon of racism that we've really been experiencing, you know, on one level wasn't really supposed to be going down like that. The reason why it went down the way it did is because those families were bleached out. So this Queen Elizabeth that may have made a deal with these, you know, Islamic Moors, man, by the time the 17 to 1800s came, that family was completely bleached out. And these original black people that were in it, or these original Moors that set up these original deals, they were gone. And by the time these Caucasian people got in, they were bringing in their faction. Like they didn't really care about, you know, whatever was going on in that same family bloodline before. So the original Queen Elizabeth, you know what I'm saying, once again, could look like a sister from the hood. That's how the original one looked. But now you see Queen Elizabeth is this vampire, reptilian, gray looking motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? That's this so-called old looking white woman. But they both got that royal Queen Elizabeth name, not knowing that the original Queen Elizabeth was an Aborigine. This is a copper colored so-called black woman. But it says it's like, you know, that the white Americans and British were in violation of international law and treaty. So that whole treaty of peace and friendship and all this other stuff that they've signed, you see what I'm saying? Like they were in violation of this shit when they were going and stealing people and renaming them as Negro and black and forcing them into servitude. That's why they had to create that whole 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and say that, well, it can't be slavery unless it's a form of punishment. So now that's why they will throw you niggas in jail for a little shake of weed, you know what I'm saying? Or throw you niggas in jail for life over this bullshit, because that's still them enacting the prisoner of war situation of the denationalized Moor. Okay, that's what that is. So the main thing that these people are rooting on is you not knowing your history and you not really knowing any of this. Because if you don't know that they ever did land deals, you know, trade deals, you know, navigation deals, maritime deals, if you don't really know they did all this stuff, then you don't know that there's something they're supposed to be upholding. So they got us crying and screaming racism when it's really just a violation of not only treaties, not only is it a violation of international law and treaties, but it's a violation of human rights. You know what I'm saying? So this is what's going down, you know. Check this out. Sylvian Diouf in his book, Servants of Allah. So here you have another book that has this information. It's a book called Servants of Allah by Sylvian Diouf. Sylvian, Sylviane, Diouf, Diouf. And the book is called Servants of Allah. It says Sylvian Diouf in his book, Servants of Allah, points out that nearly 60% of the captured people during what we call slavery were Muslims. Let me repeat this shit, man. Sylvian Diouf in his book, Servants of Allah, points out that nearly 60% of the captured peoples during what we call slavery were Muslims. So if in American slavery, they tell you that 60% of the people were Muslims, what is this telling y'all? And out of all those people, these were not Moors that were brought over here across the Atlantic Ocean. These was Muslims or Moors that were indigenous to America. So they telling you the shit right here, quoted in the book Servants of Allah, that nearly 60% of all the so-called slaves were Muslims. So now you know that out of all the slave movies you've ever seen, out of all the slave pictures you've ever seen, out of all the slave narratives and stories you've ever seen, out of all the history and propaganda that they've ever put to you about this slavery shit, that nearly 60% of all those peoples in those pictures were Muslims or Moors dealing with Islam. That's very, very powerful, because that's majority people. Anything over 50% is the majority. So if we're saying that 60% of all the so-called slaves were Muslims, that means that more than likely you all's ancient ancestors and more recent ancestors were Islamic. That's the culture that you all come from. Assalamu alaikum. This is you all's culture right here in America. So when you want to know, well, what nation did I come from? You came from the old Aboriginal Moorish Empire of America under the red flag. That's what nation you came from. What bloodline did you come from? You came from the Aboriginal Moors of America. What religion and what languages were your people more than likely dealing with? Different forms of ancient Arabic or Aramaic and Hebrew. And they were dealing with the science of Islam. Okay. Not the worship of Islam that you see these amalgamated Arabs doing. Our Islam was much, much different. It was a spiritual science, including the astrology and all the other Egyptian sciences that you all know of. The mystery system, basically. So our form of Islam is more the mystery system. These amalgamated Arabs, that's a form of religion for them and worship. So when they talk about worshiping Allah and all this different stuff, they basically talking about worshiping the Aboriginal Moors that gave them that science. But to you, it's the higher self. You see, it's the spiritual self. It's the divine self. You know what I'm saying? It's the non-physical self. You know, it's your own higher self. That's what you submitting and worshiping yourself. You know what I'm saying? As a Moor, your own higher self, your spiritual body, basically, you know. But these amalgamated Arabs, they worshiping is something totally different. That has nothing to do with us. All right, check this out. There is much proof of the settling of black people from Egypt and other empires in America prior to European colonization. These so-called Egyptians like Moses or Akhenaten, Pharaoh Akhenaten, are considered to be Moors or Muslims by nature. And according to the Book of Divine Contract of the Moorish nation, or the Quran, and the treaties of Marrakesh, 1786-1836, specify the Quran as the law of adjudication, between Muslims or Moors and white Americans. See Treaty of Marrakesh Appendix. So right here, what this is saying is that these people that you all call Egyptians actually are Moors or Muslims. Okay, that's first thing. Second thing is saying here that Moses and Pharaoh Akhenaten are more than likely one and the same, two Muslims. Then it's saying that there is much proof of so-called black people from Egypt and other empires settling in the Americas before the Europeans. We already know that. Then it says right here that the Book of Divine Contract and the Moorish nation, or the Quran, is the law of adjudication between the Muslims and the white Americans. So this Quran is actually the intermediary book between Aboriginal Moors or Autochthonous Americans, or who you all call so-called Native Americans, us, black people, This book is actually the intermediary between us and these European Caucasian Christian sons and daughters of Yaqub. So this is an intermediary right here. And this is why when they make you go in a court system, they make you put your hand on their version of the Bible and not your law. Because believe it or not, the United States is actually ran on an Islamic government. This isn't a Christian government. It's an Islamic government. That's why you have the Shriners. You know, you have the so-called Caucasian man in the daylight who's a Christian, but behind closed doors, he's really dealing with the science of Islam. All right. So let's continue. So where I want to go. We'll read a little bit about, we're going to finish it up with this amalgamated Spanish. And when they came into battling the Muslims or the Moors in like what you all call Florida, so-called Mexico, or the Aztec, these Aborigines. Now, mind you, now, when I say the King of Spain now, you got to remember that these original, people were Moors now. They were dark-skinned, copper-colored people that looked like us. But as time went on, they started to amalgamate with these Christian Caucasians. So when I say king, the King of Spain, Charles V, in 1539, you see, you got to remember, we got to remember that these people probably more than likely could have been mulatto. You see what I'm saying? They may have not been fully Caucasian, or even who you all calling a Portuguese or a Spaniard. They weren't fully Caucasian in the way they look today. They didn't look fully like that at this time, probably. So they probably still had a lot more so-called melanin in them. But anyway, let's go into this. A decree issued in 1539 by Charles V, King of Spain. And also, before I go too deeper, too, the reason why I say this is because you can find certain kings of Spain, and they were jet black Moors around this same time. You know what I'm saying? So, you did have some Moors that was on bullshit, but nevertheless, I just don't want y'all to just get confused and think that all these people were Caucasians just trying to fight against black people. It wasn't necessarily like that. But it says that King Charles V of Spain forbade the grandsons of Muslims burned at the stake to migrate to the West Indies. This decree was ratified in 1543, and an order for the expulsion of Muslims from overseas Spanish territories, which was Mexico and North and South America, was subsequently published. Why would the Christian King of Spain and the Pope of Rome want all Muslims expelled from all Spanish colonies overseas? Hernan Cortez, a Spanish criminal who invaded Mexico in 1519, who had an inborn genius for treachery and was unbelievably cruel and brutal, boasted to this same King Charles V of Spain that he had massacred unarmed women and children in order to impose his will upon the natives. So, just going deeper into the battle between the amalgamated Spaniards and the Aboriginals of Mexico. But we're going to go deeper into this history. I just wanted to go over a few things. Show y'all these ancient Egyptian connections, but it's the boy Blackbeard. Stay tuned. I'm out.